Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Visibility Area, the podcast. We are here today with really someone who's become my friend over the past year. I was introduced to Rob Snyder by another friend who ended up working at one of his startup companies. And we have now spent probably about a year every other Tuesday just brainstorming, like figuring out the ways that we can help each other grow our companies. So Rob, welcome to the show. Happy to have you here.
I'm very glad to be here finally.
Yeah. So excited. You've done some very impressive things. You're a very humble person, but you've done some really impressive things over the years. So can you give us a little intro into who Rob is, even like what you're into? Because I know that you love like living in the woods, hanging out by yourself, New Hampshire, like that is also you. So yeah, introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I don't know. Like there's we could talk professionally, we could talk personally. Like professionally, I went the normal path that like you're supposed to go on. So I did after I graduated college, I went and worked at McKinsey and Company, a consulting firm, for 2 years. Then I went to Harvard Business School. And then from there, I was like, okay, cool, let me start a company and go into the startup world. And so I've been in the startup world ever since. And I like the startup world. I find it fascinating. Um, Personally, I moved out of Boston. I got married, moved out of Boston, and moved to the woods of New Hampshire, and absolutely love New Hampshire. Like it just speaks to me in a way that Boston didn't. And yeah, I don't know. I'm married. I have a gym in my basement. I don't know. That is all of my. I'm a Bills fan, so
Yeah.
Buffalo Bills fan, and that is all of my personality altogether.
Rob, whose gym in your basement?
God.
Random gym. Oh, that's funny. Um, all right. Yeah, that's very cool. I think like one of the things that I noticed right away from you is like the way that you think, the way that you problem solve is very interesting to me. And this is why like I love brainstorming with other people. I also love talking to Lydia because we always have different perspectives on things. But one of the things that you do really well is you solve problems and you come up with creative solutions and different ways to like reframe a problem into a potential solution. So have you always been that way? Has that always been your personality?
Hmm. Maybe I don't know. It's something that has like I think emerged as a skill, maybe. Um, I don't know. Like so, I grew up kind of poor, right? And it was always like I always just had to like do creative things to like I don't know, maybe stand out or beat the like people who came from a better background. So like in college, for example, instead of like doing internships, I like picked up and moved to East Africa for my summers. And so I don't know, I was just like always doing like the weird. And then when I got to McKinsey, right, I was like nowhere near as smart as everyone else. I have no idea why they let me in. Um, but like, so what I did is I started writing a newsletter because I wasn't like good enough I was like fine at the job, but I was like definitely not the best at the job. So I started writing a newsletter and like the whole firm started subscribing to it. So like, I don't know, just always doing some finding the window when the door is locked, I guess.
What was your first company? Did you have something before you even were in college?
No, I wasn't one of those kids who had a lemonade stand or some like random high school business. I was actually a musician in high school. So, um, yeah, back in the day, played some metal music, back in the day, obviously. Um, yeah, guitar and drums. And so the first, I think like everybody else, I watched like The Social Network, the movie, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna do startups now. And so I did the like stupid startup that everybody does while I was at McKinsey, right? Like it's like the location-based discounts for restaurants, right? Like there was a graveyard, there was a mass graveyard of those businesses. And so that was like my first like actual try at a startup with a friend. And that just was before business school, it was miserable. It was just like, yeah, it did not work.
So, really quick, what does it say behind you? For anyone who's watching on YouTube, but also listening on the podcast, I just can't get it out of my head. Accelerate or die.
Yeah. So
Where'd you get that from?
yeah, so like this like actually has like some political meaning to it. So
Oh.
so like the original one is like a join or die, which was from the I think Ben Franklin made it or something like that from the American Revolution, right? Then there's like the Tea Party version of this, where there's like the yellow flags you see. There are many of those in New Hampshire, which is a different kind of politics. This one is, I think, technically an argument for the advancement of AI research. I
Huh.
bought it because I think it's really cool and it says accelerate or die. I like moving fast. I like the kind of like edginess of it. And
Yeah.
I don't know, I just like I used to be a planner and like try to like know things in advance. And now I just believe that I have to do things to learn things. And so having this in the background and just kind of like looking back at it or seeing it in my own things, it's just like, yeah, I might as well just move faster, like try things.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Bridget's helped me a lot with this, I think, in general. She's kind of a messy action gal, and I really admire that about her because it forces me to also try new things, whereas I can be very calculated at times. So I really love that. I feel like that's something we've been doing inside Visibility on Purpose. But back to you. So Bridget had told me that you worked on 7 different startups, which is wild to me. So, can you tell me a little bit about these different types of startups and like what your niche is, or if you've kind of pivoted your niche into
Mhm.
different departments and areas?
Yeah, so coming out of business school, I was a founder, and at that point, I just worked on one company, right?
Mhm.
And so I did that for 4 years. First 2 years were awful. Second 2 years were awful, but we also found traction. And so different kind of awful. Um, After that, I started getting pulled into a bunch of different software companies. So I basically exclusively work with software companies that sell to businesses. And I work with these companies at the early stage. So when they have no revenue, 100,000 in revenue, 500,000 in revenue, and they are trying to figure things out.
Mhm. Um, gosh, when I first met you, I was like, okay, is he the one developing the software? And that was, I mean, I think even for people listening, like you're not the one who's developing the software,
No,
right?
no. I'm the one who figures out how to sell the software and how to
Correct.
grow the business and how to build the
Correct.
business. Yeah, no, I can't code. I like can I can do a little bit of damage in the code base, but it is yeah, you don't want me coding.
So when you started the first company, you had a co-founder or someone else who was supporting the actual development side of the software that you were creating.
Yep, yeah. And we like raised venture money to be able to bring on developers.
Yeah. And this is one of our like big questions. I know that you have many thoughts on fundraising money and having that money to help you. So let's go over like pros and cons, because I think for people listening, maybe this is something they thought of. Maybe it seems like a pipe dream. Maybe it seems really cool. And you have interesting experience where you learned a lot from that and, maybe can shine a little light on what's important for people with that.
Yeah. So I like when I went to build my first business, I didn't realize there was an option to not raise venture. And so the most important thing is to know there are two options. You can either raise money from investors or you can bootstrap the business yourself. There are reasons to do both of them. What most people don't understand is that the venture capital model is really designed for businesses that want to get to or like have a pretty clear line of sight to $100 million in revenue per year. That's what the model is designed for. And so if you don't want to do that, or if you'd be happy with like a $5-10 million business, don't raise money. Bootstrap it. Find a way to not raise money. Venture is the go big or go home game. And so you have to understand. There's a bunch else to understand about the pros and cons of either direction, but that is the most important piece is like, don't raise if you're not going to go big.
So, this is a fully loaded question,
Yeah.
but I'm sure you've done, or maybe you haven't, but maybe you've done the research on the success rate for these types of businesses. I just find this so interesting because it's not my realm. And we did have somebody on the show who is a tech startup, who owns a tech startup, and she was in the process of going to raise money. And so have you seen the success rate of these things? What happens like if you like raise the capital and it doesn't work out? Like, do you give the money back? Like what happens here? Because I just have no idea.
Yeah, I don't know the exact numbers, but
Okay.
something in the realm of like 8 or 9 out of 10 companies that go this route fail, or like
Wow.
don't return the money they raise in some way,
Wow.
shape, or form. But that's the thing. That's how the industry is designed,
Right.
because the industry is designed where venture capital investors put in money, expect to lose it on 9 out of 10 companies. And so if you expect to lose it on 9 out of 10 companies, the one that succeeds has to do really, really well to pay back for all of the others and everything else. And so that's why everybody has to be swinging for 100 million, so that the industry kind of like keeps working.
It's so interesting. And I remember the other thing that you told me is then you're kind of at the whim of what the investor wants. It's like you might be the founder of the company, but your decisions don't just get to be yours anymore. You know, you have people behind the scenes who are kind of guiding the way. So talk a little bit about like what that looked like.
Yeah, so like that, I mean, I've dealt with that. Like investors are actually, they get a bad rap. There are some like absolute idiots in the game who don't realize they're idiots, and it's like that every founder has stories that we will share when we are not being recorded about how big of idiots investors can be. Most are not. Most are like solid people. They want the business to grow big, right? And they are aligned in that way with you. But there's a big important caveat here, which is if you hit 5, 10 million, $15 million in revenue, and you're like, wow, this is awesome. Like, I just want to run this business. That is not an option when you have a board. That is not an option. You have to keep going big, and you have to keep pushing to double or triple every single year. And so just like know that, and say, like, you just can't decide, you know what? I'd rather not. I like the business where it is now. You have to push. And so that's the big thing. And if you disagree on that, guess who gets to fire you?
Wow, this is so interesting. So, as you know, we are a little bit of health wellness junkies.
Yep.
This feels like a lot of pressure. And
Yes.
so, how do you manage the stress of working on new projects, working on new stories, or maybe have you in the past? Like, how have you dealt with this and been able to not lose sleep at night when things aren't working? I'm sure there's lots of ebbs and flows when it comes to building something like this.
Mm. Yeah, this is the most stressful thing.
Yeah.
Like, um, it is stressful when it isn't working, and it is stressful when it is working. It is a level of stress that like I cannot express if you have not been in it. You don't sleep. You can't sleep. You like wake up sweating at like midnight every single night, check your phone, freak out. There were periods of time when I would just wake up at 2 a.m. and work all the way through the rest of the day, because I was just like, screw it. It is at least better to make progress on this than to I don't know, than to just like toss around in bed and like be miserable. And so yeah, no, it's terrible. Like there is oh, let me get to the good part of this. Like it's terrible. It's terrible on your health. It's terrible on your mental health. It is like businesses are not meant to grow that fast.
Mm.
There's it's very hard to do that. It's very hard to triple every single year. And so what it takes to do that is you just have to be very intense and like borderline insane to be able to do that and to thrive in that. Now, the good side of it is that, right, like you can't sprint your whole life, right? Just like you're running a race. Sprinting for way too long will hurt you. But the act of sprinting makes you stronger, even if it hurts in the moment. And so the reason I like building companies and the reason I like doing very stressful things is because it makes me better.
This is also true. And now you have a little bit more freedom. Like you're no
Yeah.
longer, you know, running that business. You've transitioned to more of a bootstrap model, which is just you're not getting the funding when you started this new business. So talk a little bit about that transition to then just kind of going on your own. I know you're doing consulting with some companies still, but you really made like this product market fit camp your baby. It is your thing. It is what you want to be known for. It is what you do talks on. Like it is your thing. So how was that transition then to what you're doing now?
Yeah, there's a different kind of stress with this. And I like this stress better because I have full ownership of the thing. And so, right, like 3 p.m. on a Saturday, it's like, I want to be working on this business. I need to be working on this business now. And I don't feel sick about that. I feel excited about it. And so, yeah, so I've moved from the venture-backed model to now I run 2 bootstrapped companies. One is a boot camp for founders on founder-led sales and product market fit. We can go into what that means. And that's awesome. That is something that I would like to keep doing for the rest of my life. The second thing is I run a bootstrap software company that is just getting off the ground too. So yeah, I love it.
I love that you're so diverse in what you do, and you have consulting, you have different products, it's so much fun because I think it really adds some creativity into the mix, which some people might think of software as like kind of dry, but you've made it really creative. So I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot.
Bring it on.
All right. When you were in this process of raising capital, or maybe you had already raised it, and you were trying to make something work, was there ever like an oh shit moment where you were like, this is not working? You woke up in the middle of the night and you experienced all of this and it ended up working out. Like, without getting too technical, was there an experience that you could share with our listeners of like what ended up happening to really like paint a picture of the feeling of this process?
Yeah. Yeah. So there was like the first 2 years were basically me waking up in the middle of the night saying, oh my God, this isn't working. I'm such an idiot. And so what I took away from that was like, basically I came into this with a vision, with a here's what the product I think the world needs. Here's the long-term plan that we have. Here's, all of these different things that we believe about the world. And then we went and tried to put that out into the world. And turns out the world didn't care. The world didn't give a, am I allowed to swear here? Is that okay? Okay, the world didn't give a flying fuck what I thought, right? And so I spent 2 years just trying to push my ideas onto the world. And then it's like, all right, screw it. Like, we're running out of money. This isn't working. Nobody cares. And we just did like the dumbest thing ever that is like so obvious after the fact. Said, all right, screw it. I have no more ideas. I'm going to go to someone and say, what would you pay me to help you solve? And like, they're like, oh, interesting. Yeah, we'll pay you to help us solve this problem, this recruiting problem in our business. It's like, all right, screw it. We're going to do that. And then we just kind of like started doing that. And we didn't think too hard about where it was going. And in the process of doing that and repeating that, like, we just figured out everything that mattered. And so it was like it was basically an unlearning of everything that I had learned at McKinsey and HBS in terms of having plans and having, like having a lot of slide decks and a lot of analyses. And it's just like, all right, forget all of that. Just find somebody to pay you money, figure out how to repeat that, and then figure out the business as you do that. And it's that fucking simple.
I love that you said, we just simply asked, what is the problem that we can solve for you? And Bridget, for all of our listeners, Bridget and Rob like to have little chats every now and then Bridget will come back to me and tell me what they talked about. And she said more than once, like, is there a problem that we can solve? We've been talking about this, and it's such a simple marketing and entrepreneurial question, but sometimes we can get lost in the sauce and think like, no, this is what I think makes sense. And so I'm going to move forward with this. So what is the question, or maybe like, what would you give advice to? What kind of advice would you give to entrepreneurs who might be running into some sort of plateau to ask their maybe audience members, or to look at things differently? Because I feel like sometimes we can get so stuck in our head and narrow when we really just need to like pull out.
the trap that I see everybody falls into, and I still do this myself, but this is the hardest one to get out of, is like you're focused on the solution, you're focused on your product or your service. And it's really, really hard to get out of that focus, because all you want to do is you want to add more bells and whistles to it. And you think that if you just describe it a little better, people will love you, people will buy it. Like and that doesn't work. That doesn't work. What I've found is there is like only one way to get out of this and to like figure out what people really want. And it is to forget your product. Literally pretend it doesn't exist. Forget your product, forget your service, and focus on what is the thing that your customers want to accomplish. And that thing they want to accomplish, they would want to accomplish whether or not you existed, whether or not your product was around. Forget about your product, just focus on that. That is what I call demand, right? What they want to accomplish, whether or not you exist, you have no control over that. You figure that out, then your product can make sense within that. Then you can figure out how to bring your product back in to make it a response to that. But if you are thinking about your product as you ask those questions, you'll come up with dumb answers and you won't actually solve that. Like that is the only way out.
Do you have like a good example of that? Maybe like
Yeah.
someone who's come through like one of the boot camps with you. Yeah, give us an example.
Yeah. So my good friends run a boring company in a boring space. And nobody likes QA. And QA is basically like when you're building software, before you press the button to release the software to the world, you want to make sure it works. And QA is a way to test software before you release it into the world. I can tell you're already falling asleep. Anyway, it's just like not an exciting part of the world, but a necessary part of the world. What they were originally selling was a QA automation software, right? And they were selling, it had AI as a part of it. So they're selling the fastest AI-powered QA automation software. So obviously, nobody really cared. Nobody wants to think about QA. It's just like not an exciting topic. And so you only think about it when you're forced, and then there's a bunch of different softwares out there. So they took a step back and said, okay, we've been describing this, we've been trying to push this onto the market, and the market really isn't pulling. So let's forget about it for a second. The couple of people who have bought from us, what did they really, really want to achieve? Let's just forget about our product for a second. And what they realized was they don't want faster QA automation software. They want QA totally taken off their plate. They don't want to think about QA at all. And by changing their pitch around that and changing a little bit about how they delivered, they went from like, we are struggling at sub 100K in revenue to $1 million plus in revenue in like 12 months. And sales cycles that were faster. They felt like they could speak their customer's language, and they felt like they could build something that was actually unique in that space. And so that's the kind of activity. You forget about your product, figure out what's the thing they're actually trying to accomplish, whether or not we exist, that we had no control over, and how do they think about that?
I love this. You're very good at these like framework concepts. I mean, it's literally why you have something called Reframe. So this makes a lot of sense. What else should a company be thinking about in terms of positioning? Because usually they're coming to at a point where like they already have a solid idea, but something just isn't quite working. Like they're not known for like their thing and it's not quite fitting the way it should. So what are some of the thoughts around positioning that a company should be thinking about?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think like the hardest thing, and the reason I needed all these frameworks is because it's just so ambiguous and there are so many things that you can possibly do at this early stage to like figure out what is your positioning, figure out where do you play, where do you not play. All of that is really hard to figure out. What I've found is that there's one specific mental model that I recommend startups have. And this helps clear up everything and makes it radically simple what matters and what doesn't. And this model is a customer case study. I don't know if you're familiar with that, right? Like it's just like this customer needed to accomplish this, and here's how we help them, right? If you think about that for one customer, and you make it very concrete for one customer, That is the core of your business. That is the essence of your business. And everything else about your business is just repeating that case study. That is what it is. And so as you think about your positioning, you don't think about it in the abstract. You think about it in terms of this one specific customer's case study. And it needs to be something where you show that customer's case study to someone who looks just like them. And that person's like, oh, hell yeah, I understand what that is. I want that too. And that's it. It's just like that simple. And so that is how you figure it out. Any other way you approach this problem, you wind up sounding like an MBA and making no sense to anybody.
You like simplified that into the most layman's of terms. Basically, you're saying like rinse and repeat. Like once you have that thing that works well for that one customer and you're able to showcase it in the language that actually makes sense, then you literally rinse and repeat.
You just repeat it, copy paste, right? Like just think of it as copy paste. And so here's the interesting thing when you do that. It doesn't always work. It doesn't always work perfectly. And so as you try to rinse and repeat, you learn things that you couldn't have known in advance, that you couldn't have planned for. And that process helps you figure out what the business really is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like the feedback that I mean, you and I have talked about this a lot. The feedback that we either get or don't get is great feedback because you're gonna figure out everything from what you get or you don't get. So I love that. I want to transition it a little bit into the visibility piece of the companies that you work with and yours, because Lydia and I are very used to like a social media marketing model where we are using social media to create an audience, build value, build a community, sell to them, email marketing, like that whole funnel is what we know really well. But I'm very curious what it looked like, from how does a startup company get visible?
I don't, it's always different. And most of the time they don't. So like early on, so the way I think about it is like early on, first $1 million to $2 million in revenue is about figuring the business out. At that point, you can be visible, but it doesn't really matter because you don't know what you're doing. You don't know until a couple million in revenue. Then you transition to like, okay, we know what we're doing. We need to scale it a lot more. And like, that's when we start thinking more deeply about marketing and social media and stuff like that. And so you go from, right, like this, it transitions from founder-led sales to, there's this new hot term called founder-led marketing. Shocker. And then you go to like, then you go to like scaling stage. And so I think in the founder-led marketing stage is when you start thinking about social media. And I don't know, it looks, what I've seen is that a lot of like founders posting on social media works a lot. You could just also like, there's a ton of companies that haven't had any visibility and they just have like a boiler room of people cold calling businesses. And like, that works too.
Yeah, I feel like, okay, so I have a few friends that are in startups, and I have a friend right now that is raising capital in the crypto space. I have no idea what the hell he does. It's like gibberish to me, but I'm always like, tell me about it anyway. I'm so proud of you. But he goes to, God bless, right? But he goes to a lot of conferences and meetings and things like that. So in the startup world, especially in maybe tech, is that kind of how they get their customers, or like, what does the customer look like? You mentioned cold calls. So I would be curious to know if there's other avenues that are typically used.
Totally. So yeah, the way to think about it is every startup needs one scalable growth channel at some point, right? Which is basically one thing where we can spend more money there and get more customers out of it. That's what everybody wants. That is, you kind of like start working on that. 500K, you start trying to figure it out. It is different depending on who your end customer is and what your product is. So I know one company that went from 0 to 100 sales reps on literally just conferences. That's all they did. The only thing they did. And I think that's the right way to think about it, because the chief marketing officer there was like, listen, I could spend money elsewhere, but I haven't spent all of the possible money I can spend on this channel to get everybody, like to get all of the customers here. Let's just do more of what works. And so it could be trade shows. It could be paid ads. It could be SEO, right? Like there are tons of different channels, and it just depends who your end customer is and how, like, what channel will work for them, and you just need one.
Yeah. So, okay, if somebody is listening who thinks that they need to, what I've personally seen, okay, I'll pull back. What I've personally seen is there's the shiny object syndrome where you see somebody find success in maybe conferences, and then they decide they want to go to conferences, and then they see somebody find success in social media or whatever that is, and they just hop around, and then it's LinkedIn next week. So what kind of advice would you give to an entrepreneur or a startup founder that helps them stay on track for their ideal customer? Like, what questions should they ask themselves?
Yeah, this depends on the stage, right? So if you don't have that repeatable customer success story, the case study, and you haven't repeated that like 100 times, don't think about this. This isn't the problem. If you have, then what you have to ask yourself is, how did we get these customers? What actually works in practice? Let's look at our last 20 customers and figure out, what is it about them? How did we find them? And like, how do we just do more of that? Do more of what works is always the answer.
It makes a lot of sense. And I feel like that's a conversation we've had many times. It's like thinking about, okay, where do those people actually come from? And then doing that exercise is very, very helpful, because then you realize, well, you realize what you didn't realize, which is like they were mostly coming through social, or they're mostly like watching you on LinkedIn, or they subscribed to your Substack, or like it was a simpler answer than I think we make it out to be. As we were sitting here talking, I'm thinking about, what is in your mind, what's the difference between a startup and like just a business? Is there a difference?
No, they're like, what's really interesting is I meet a lot of different people who are starting businesses, starting startups. There's a kind of person who calls themselves a founder. And what that person is, they're usually thinking about raising money, and they're trying to think big. Then I meet this kind of person who's like, they call themselves an owner. Like, I'm a business owner, right? Still building a software business. The business owners are like, just like way more practical about it. They do way fewer things. They're like, I know I'm selling this thing to this person. I know I'm doing it through this channel. I'm not going to think too hard about it. I'm going to go for a beer at 5. Like, I'm just going to keep doing this thing. And like, I think, I don't have the numbers on this, but if I had to bet, in 5 years, the business owner kind of like person is probabilistically way wealthier and like better off than the average person on this. Now, like, the variance on the startup side is super high. So you might have 1 out of 100 that's $1 billion company. Cool. But like 99 of those people are just hitting their head against the wall repeatedly. And this person over here has like a $3 million revenue business, calls themselves the business owner, and like shows up wearing a fancy, like, I don't know, a blazer at a conference, right? And like, that's how he gets his leads.
Bridget, are we totes business owners?
That's what I was thinking about. I was like, we do call ourselves co-founders of Visibility on Purpose, but I've never thought of Visibility on Purpose as a startup in some way. Because I almost think it's like it's a framework in people's mind, and then you get tapped into like what that means. And it feels like for a lot of people, it's much more like potentially intense, technical. There's just a lot more going on in that sphere. I don't know.
Yeah, I
It's
think
like
it holds weight.
Yeah,
oh, sorry.
It does. It's like, it makes you, I actually think it makes you lose like 30 IQ points, just like the second you're like, this is a startup, because then you're like, how does this work at $1 billion in revenue? How do we make network effects work? And it's like, just sell some fucking software. Like, that's it.
Isn't it funny how language holds different opinions, perspectives, like whatever it may be? And this is something we talk about a lot in our courses when we're asking our clients, like, what do you want to call yourselves? And these types of questions, because it does actually make a difference in the consumer's minds. Like, we might think of something differently, but to me, if I'm thinking about a startup or a startup founder, immediately I'm thinking about exactly what you said. Like, oh, they might have investors. Maybe they like are trying to raise capital. Maybe they're trying to make $1 million or make it work really quickly. And so it definitely holds weight or lives in a different part of my mind. But I want to pivot to, what is Rob doing right now? Like, what are you doing right now? What are you looking to build? I feel like are you working on multiple businesses? You said you're working on like consulting and different things. So please give us like the full rundown.
Yeah, so I run two businesses right now. One is a boot camp for founders
Yeah.
to figure out the messy early stage. Do that once a quarter, bring in 20, 30 different startups and help them figure it out. And to your point about messaging and words, I
Yeah.
hate the word boot camp, like hate it with my whole soul. It doesn't explain what this is. I will figure that out in time. The reason I like that is I just love doing that. I would spend my time doing that if I didn't get paid for it. I just love it. Where that goes, I have no idea. Right now, it pays it pays my mortgage, and it's like a solid thing to do, and people like tend to really like it. On the other side, I'm building a software business that is in a space too boring to even bring up here. I promise you, you would be asleep in a second. I'm also like writing a book on the side, and I write a newsletter too. And so all this is just like it's all kind of like one thing in my mind. It just takes different shapes.
Where can people join your newsletter and maybe connect with you? Because I know that you have one platform that is your bread and butter.
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I post there a lot. I hate myself every time I post, and I write a newsletter at it's on a Substack, and it's howtogrow.substack.com.
Who would not be a good fit to come onto that Substack?
If you're not curious about how it works, how the core of product market fit in the early stage and how to figure this out, if you're not curious about that, then like I'm just going to be writing just nonsense for you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Rob. I'm going to follow you on LinkedIn or connect with you. So funny. You were like, I hate myself every time I post there. There was a hilarious reel, as one does, scroll on Instagram the other day where this guy was like, me nowhere, me on LinkedIn. Great to connect, blah, blah, blah. Just making fun of
Wait,
how
I
people
love that
act.
guy. I know exactly who you're
It was
talking.
so funny. Well, somebody recently messaged me yesterday and they were like, hey, Lydia, I loved your comment under this comment, whatever. I totally agree with you. And I was like, let me have some fun with this. So the comment that I messaged, and then we can totally close out, but I just want to share this because I thought it was so funny. So I found this man who's the founder of a PR company, and he is just like unhinged on LinkedIn. And I was like, it was so funny. I'm like, this is the influencer I've been waiting for. He's like a middle-aged man, talks about PR in like a funny way. So I commented underneath it. And then this person must have found me on LinkedIn, wanted to connect because of my comment. So I wrote in our message, she's like, great to connect, like very, robotic. And I was like, oh, thank you so much. Like, I never thought that I would be interested in a PR influencer, but he's the guy I've been waiting for, if that's even a thing. LOL, just making it really normal. And he responded back to me and was just like, haha, so funny. I think it is a thing. And I'm like, wow, we can be normal on LinkedIn. So anyways, I find LinkedIn very interesting of a platform to play with. Okay, here's my last question before we go. How do you use LinkedIn?
I
Speaking of unhinged.
yeah, so I just forced myself to like I have to post 3 to 5 days a week every single week on LinkedIn. And I set that as the thing I was just going to do probably about a year and a half ago. The first time I posted on LinkedIn, I like had it written out on my phone, and I was like, I can't do this. And so I went to my wife and I was like, I just can't do it. And she was like, stop being a bitch, just press post. And so that got me over the hump the first time. And yeah, now I just do it like 3 to 5 times a week, and I approach it as if just like the like case study thing, I'm writing, all of my posts are written for one person. They're written with one person in mind, and the more honestly I do that, the better they perform. And then I just like comment random shit on people's things whenever I get a chance. But
I love that.
No secret.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, that was kind of a secret. It was thinking about that one person in mind and posting for them, because I feel like LinkedIn is a place where people are looking for one specific type of content. And if you can bring in people that are interested in that, That's the whole point. So anyways, I can't wait for you to be my second big influencer on LinkedIn. Rob, thank you so much for joining us on an episode of Visibility Era, the podcast. I know a lot of our listeners got so much amazing insight, and it was just really fun. So thank you.
Thanks for having me. Sorry for killing your subscriber list.
No.